From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming today. My name is Elmer Huisman. I'm the Chief of the Conservation Division here at the library, and I'd like to welcome you to one of our April TOPS lectures, our Topics in Conservation series, an ongoing lecture series related to the preservation of our cultural heritage, and bring speakers to the library to discuss their experience and research. I would like to mention that we have a second April TOPS session coming on the 28th and the 29th. It is a two-day event titled Chemometrics and Multivariate Analysis of Heritage Data. It will focus on databases and data mining and involve a day of lectures and a one-day workshop. So top lectures are open to the public and often available by webcast. Our session today is being webcast. And we have about 36 people who are joining us online, so a warm welcome to them. Webcast sessions are archived and available through our TOPS website, and I encourage you to visit our preservation website and browse through the lectures. We have a large selection available right now at loc.gov/preservation/outreach/TOPS. One of our ongoing themes within TOPS are lectures related to the conservation, outreach, and training. In the past few years, we have had lectures concerning the graduate conservation programs at Buffalo State, New York University, University of Texas, as well as lectures concerning preservation training at historically black colleges and outreach and training initiatives by the Foundation of the American Institute for Conservation, FAIC. And another plug, in December 1st, we will have another top session to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Winterthur University of Delaware program in art conservation, and I hope you can join us for that. So today's lectures are a perfect fit in this theme. 5 speakers will discuss the Hermitage Photograph Conservation Initiative established in 2010 to help inaugurate the Department of Photograph Conservation at the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. Administered by FAIC, the initiative is funded through a grant received from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and central to the project is the training in conservation, documentation, and cataloging. And this training has been conducted through an unprecedented collaboration involving numerous institutions in the United States and Europe, including Harvard University and the Library of Congress, all working toward the ultimate goal of preserving the Hermitage's outstanding collection of photographs that number in excess of 470,000. So, with that, I'm going to introduce my first speaker, Paul Messier. Paul founded his Boston-based art conservation practice in 1994 and serves as the co-director of the FAIC Mellon Hermitage Initiative of Photograph Conservation, where he has worked starting in 2005. His professional activities include volunteer service to the American Institute for Conservation, including serving on the board of directors from 2004 to 2009, and founding the Electronic Media Group in 1996. Other pursuits are the development of a reference collection of photographic papers, as well as independent research and writing. He received an MA in art conservation from the State University College of Buffalo. And I should also say Paul and I go way back, early 90s, I think, so it's really great to introduce him as the first speaker. Thank you.
Elmer, did you walk off with one of my pages? I think you did. No, I can't. Okay, usually I can fake it. That's built a career basically on doing that. But right now, I'm not going to take any chances here. Too much at stake, right? It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to put some focus on the FAIC Mellon Hermitage Initiative in photograph conservation and highlight how essential the role collaboration has played in this work. Our project to found a Department of Photograph Conservation at the Hermitage was begun about 3.5 years ago, as Elmer said, in 2010. And today we'll hear from conservative colleagues from Brenda, Andrew, 2 institutions that have generously supported our work, from the Library of Congress and Harvard University Library. These 2 are representing many others that have ensured the success of this ambitious project. Among them, the Amon Carter Museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Atelier de Restauration des Photographies, Buffalo State Art Conservation Program, the Center for the Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, the Centre de Recherche sur la Conservation des Collections, the George Eastman House, the Getty Museum, the Huntington Library, the Library of the Russian Academy of Arts, the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Munich State Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the National Gallery of Art, the New York Public Library, the Royal Danish Academy of Arts, the University of Delaware Art Conservation Program. I took the time to read that list to make a point. It's a long list, right? It's a list of big, important, and perhaps imposing institutions, but it's the people in these institutions that have made it work. Generous, kind, smart, and extremely dedicated people. We are so fortunate in conservation in general and in photograph conservation in particular to have a strong international network that can be rallied so readily and effectively. And I'm very proud of my role helping to bring the Hermitage directly into the heart of this network. A key part of the network for many years has been Angelica Rudenstein, formerly of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Angelica recognized the potential of the people and professionals in this network, and in doing so worked extremely hard to elevate the field of photograph conservation and our status as conservators. Our Hermitage initiative would have been impossible without her vision and support. More recently, through the Mellon, our efforts not only have been sustained but substantially augmented by Marriott Westerman, Ashley Farrell, and Allison Gilchrist, and I'm very grateful for their insight, leadership, and constant help along the way. Another key has been the role of the foundation of the American Institute of Conservation. I have to say there was no guarantee of success 4 or so years ago when we started talking about this project. It was big, it was ambitious, and it was extremely complicated. But FAIC, under the leadership of Errol Wentworth and Eric Porchot, have been absolutely stalwart and unafraid to take some risk in service to the profession. This is a remarkable and genuinely underappreciated aspect of the work of the foundation, taking on big projects, big responsibilities to forward the mission of cultural heritage preservation. Some examples: the response to the hurricanes Katrina and Sandy, the earthquake in Haiti, the rescue of Conservation Online, combined with the administration of an outstanding program of professional development courses, as well as the administration of grants and scholarships for conservators. For me, working on the Hermitage project has been a privilege and a professional high point. Not only do I believe in the mission, but I believe in and deeply appreciate the opportunity to... So slick. Oh, what did I do? To collaborate with so many talented, hardworking, and thoughtful people, some of whom I have the honor of introducing today. Elmer, by the way, should I introduce, or do you want to?
You want to take the first one because you have yours? Or
Why don't you come back?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Elmer for more introductions.
Okay. My great pleasure to introduce Eric Porchot. Eric is the Institutional Advancement Director for the Foundation for of the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, FAIC, where he is responsible for the Professional Development Program. He managed the AIC Collections Emergency Response Team and serves on the Advisory Committee for the Hermitage Photograph Conservation Initiative. Eric holds a Master of Business, I did not know that, Administration, and a PhD, MFA, and BA in Theater.
Let's just... We're loading. Oh, great. Well, it's great to have you all here today, and especially, of course, to welcome our Russian colleagues who are here on their first visit, at least officially, to Washington, D.C. And happy to have them here, and so happy that the cherry blossoms cooperated this year and are in full swing. Paul and the other speakers today have been will be telling you about the Hermitage Initiative and about this week's training program in particular. But I wanted to provide a little bit of context for the remarks. Basically, I'm going to try to answer the question, why is the foundation of the American Institute for Conservation involved in this Hermitage initiative to establish a photograph conservation department at the Hermitage Museum in Russia? Stepping back a little bit, FAIC works very closely with our sister organization, the AIC, the American Institute for Conservation. We share space, we share some staff in our offices here in Washington, D.C., but the two organizations do have very distinctly different purposes and missions. The AIC is the professional association of those working in conservation in the United States. AIC provides services to their members, such as professional meetings, establishment of professional standards, a journal, other publications, and networking opportunities. FAIC, the foundation, in contrast, is a 501c3 publicly supported foundation. FAIC's mission is to advance the conservation profession internationally and to address global preservation priorities. And in that context, FAIC reviews and creates a strategic plan every 3 years to develop programs based on that mission and plan for the staffing and financial support that will be needed to carry those out. The Hermitage initiative was undertaken by FAIC not only because it's valuable in its own right, as I'm sure you'll be hearing today, but also will serve as a model for the development of photograph conservation laboratories elsewhere in the world. FAIC's funding comes from a wide variety of federal agencies, foundations, corporations, and individuals, along with endowment earnings. At any one point in time, we manage 12 to 14 active grants. We do a lot of projects. We are an active organization, but a lot of our activities fall into 4 major categories of disaster response, publications, grants and scholarships, and professional development. In disaster response, FAIC trained and maintains a team of 107 professionals who are able to respond to collecting institutions in need following emergencies. Our volunteer teams, the AIC CERT, have provided critical advice and services since 2008 following floods in the Midwest, Hurricanes Ike, Irene, and Sandy, and other disasters. After the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, FAIC worked in close partnership with the Smithsonian Institution and the U.S. Committee of the Blue Shield to provide volunteer conservation services and training to help preserve that country's cultural collections. FAIC supports many publications in the conservation field, including awarding 41 Samuel H. Kress Conservation Publication Fellowships, which have significantly increased the body of conservation literature. Our online initiatives include digitizing back issues of the Journal of the AIC to make those freely available to the international scholars, creating online tutorials in conservation science, which were translated into Arabic, and establishing wikis to update and create catalogs of practice for various conservation specialties. FAIC, as Paul mentioned, maintains the Conservation Online, which is an online platform for international conservation information, and the Conservation Disc List, which has over 10,000 subscribers from at least 91 countries. And in our surveys, we found that at least 57% of the users of this free international resource are from outside the United States. Each year, FAIC awards about 90 grants and scholarships, averaging around $400,000 a year, and those are for international exchange, workshop attendance, publications, fellowships, lectures, and other projects. Since 1997, we've offered scholarships to conservation professionals from Latin America, funded by the Getty Foundation, which has enabled over 230 conservators from that region to attend the AIC annual meeting. This one's in trip to Santa Fe as part of our Albuquerque meeting. In professional development, we provide mid-career professional development opportunities for conservators as well as allied professionals. And since 2001, we've reached over 8,400 individuals with nearly 300 online and live events. And we partner in doing that with a long list of museums, libraries, archives, and historic sites across the country and internationally. This week, for example, we're partnering with ICOM-CC's Metal Working Group and the Smithsonian Institution to produce an international conference and workshop on conservation of aluminum, and that's attended by 115 conservators from 5 continents. To highlight one education program that's closely related to what we're doing at the Hermitage, we offer the Collaborative Workshops in Photograph Conservation, a series started by Nora Kennedy and Debbie Hess-Norris some 15 years ago, and that's supported by an endowment grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. This fall, in this series, we're going to offer an international conference plus workshops and tours on platinum and palladium photographs. And that's organized by Connie McCabe of the National Gallery of Art, who's here today, in collaboration with the National Gallery, the Library of Congress, and the Smithsonian Institution. And these programs rely very heavily on international and interdisciplinary collaboration, and they help to foster interactions between the participants. So given that context, it really isn't all that strange that FAIC would collaborate with the Mellon Foundation to lead this multi-year initiative. It's a large, complicated, and international project, but FAIC has developed the capacity to manage a project of this scale. The initiative builds on our international mission and scope. It builds on our partnerships with leading museums and libraries around the world. It builds on our expertise with international grants and scholarships, and builds on our extensive education programs. So we look forward to continuing our partnerships with funders, collecting institutions, allied organizations around the world, and of course with the instructors and the learners, who often reverse roles to become the learners and the instructors, who seek to keep improving our ability to care for the world's treasures. So thank you very much. I guess I turn things over back to Elmer to introduce Brenda Bernier. Thank you.
All right, great pleasure to introduce Brenda Bernier. Brenda is the head of the Weissman Preservation Center and the Paul M. and Harriet L. Weissman Senior Photograph Conservator. She came to Harvard in 2005 after 12 years in the Washington, D.C. area, where she gained professional experience at the National Archives and Records Administration, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, the National Gallery of Art, and the Balter Museum of Art, where Brenda and I first met. She has a master's degree in photograph conservation from the Winterthur University of Delaware, program in art conservation. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Elmer, for that nice introduction. And I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be with you all here today. So Harvard has had an association with the Hermitage Photograph Preservation Initiative for several years, advising and teaching. And some of our staff have been involved with the initiative even before joining Harvard. But the most significant association is the model itself. How Harvard developed and implement a multidisciplinary approach to the development of a robust photograph preservation program, and how this in turn helped inform the efforts at the Hermitage. And at the root of that issue are the nature of large decentralized photograph collections. At Harvard, we have about 10 million photographs in libraries, archives, and museums, and since our preservation center is rooted within the Harvard Library, we're most concerned with the 73 libraries that make up Harvard's network. And you can see in this map, the libraries are highlighted in red, and we are the little tiny building at the tip of that arrow. I'd like to give you just the briefest of backgrounds about Harvard's collections, because it's always important to remember why we do what we do. And you can think of Harvard's photographs in three major collecting areas. And the first are, because it's a university, photographs used in research. This is a beautiful multiple exposure of the moon, and it was the first photographic evidence of the rotation of the Earth. Here's some cutting-edge technology. Another section of collecting interests are photographs documenting Harvard history, and this includes papers of professors and alumni. And here's a nice photograph of the Computation Lab circa 1947. And because there are 73 libraries, there are 73 different collecting priorities. And so the photographs reflect the collecting priorities of those libraries. And this is from a beautiful collection of Julia Child photographs taken by her husband, and it is now in the collection of the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America. So the efforts to understand where all these photographs are in such a decentralized institution, those efforts date back to the 1960s. Davis Pratt was the first curator of photography at the FAIC at Harvard, and he created a detailed listing of a broad range of collections. And he described this as, quote, a significant new Harvard collection rising out of the almost forgotten storage bins in university libraries and museums, end quote. And this effort extended into the 1980s as curators worked together to develop a directory to photographs at Harvard, which was a paper issue of a beautiful finding aid. So as Harvard wanted to develop some more substantial preservation efforts for their photographs, they were awarded in 2002 a planning grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to complete a photograph survey. And the survey was designed and implemented by Paul Messier in conjunction with Weissman Preservation Center staff, particularly Melissa Banta. And there were two main goals of this survey. And the first one was, of course, to identify the preservation needs of the photographs in the collections. And the second was to understand how those needs could be developed into a robust photograph preservation program. There were three components of the survey. The first were directory entries, which was made much easier by the fact that there was this 1980s version of the directory. But through this process, they were updated. There was an online questionnaire, 56 questions in various categories, and this format foreshadowed the format of the Heritage Preservation's Heritage Health Index, which was 2 years later. And then there were on-site, in-person site visits. So this three-part model has been adopted by several institutions, including the Library of Congress and, of course, the Hermitage. And so it's colloquially known as the Harvard Survey Model, which kind of makes us laugh a little bit. But there were two major byproducts of this survey. And the first was the directory to photographs at Harvard was then updated and put online. And we're in the process of creating our third version in a much more interactive kind of way on the internet. And it goes to show that it's a living, breathing document. The second, of course, was the results themselves. And there were five major areas of need that were identified through the survey, as you see here. And it's not terribly surprising to libraries that cataloging came up as a critical element for preservation and access. And this keeps in keeping with the workshop that our colleagues are having this week. So in terms of preservation, the cataloging reduces unnecessary handling, and more importantly for us, allows collections to be stored at the Harvard Depository, which has really excellent environmental conditions. So it reaches into another of these categories. And then in terms of access, it's important for Harvard's teaching mission, of course, and increasing role of digitization in library collections. And in terms of education and outreach, the libraries at the time of the survey identified three major areas that they wanted help in education and outreach, and that was consultation, workshops, and online resources. So the needs that were identified in the survey helped guide what kind of staffing we would want in our photograph preservation program. We received a multi-year grant from the Mellon Foundation in 2005, and this is a picture at the height of our grant period where we had 2 conservators, a curator, 2 technicians, and a cataloger. And so I want to circle back to the Hermitage. We think of our program being around for so long, but it really isn't. We're only about 5 years older than the Hermitage program. So at the time when we were ramping up our program, the Hermitage was just undergoing their photograph survey. And so over the last few years, as we have been able to demonstrate success with our program model, this perhaps served as inspiration for the development of the Hermitage's program model. Now, not every project we do touches on those 5 different areas in a multidisciplinary way, but when they do, they are most successful. And I'd like to give you just a few brief examples. So the Fine Arts Library at Harvard is a very large library with approximately 1.5 million photographs. And they were faced with an impending move as their building, which was part of the Harvard Art Museum, was being demolished and rebuilt. And I just want to quickly show you what they were up against. As you can see, there were photographs everywhere, in boxes, in flat files, rolled. I don't even know what that is. And about 500,000 mounted photographs. And so the library staff did indeed process and box most of the collection. Our technicians were able to help with custom boxes for things like odd-sized glass plate negatives and packing the 95,000 lantern slides that you see in this slide on the right. But there were many, many unprocessed collections that were not organized or cataloged. And this is where our cataloger, Robert Burton's expertise really came into play. Working approximately 2-3 days a week for 3 years, Robert cataloged 186 collections for the Fine Arts Library, which represented, wait for it, 1,137,000 photographs. And of this, there was one collection that stood out of hand-painted Japanese albumin prints from the Meiji period in these beautiful albums. And they all had this bookplate from E.G. Stillman, who was a Harvard alum and benefactor. So Robert created his catalog record, and the catalog record was then seen by another staff member at a different library, who then recognized that there were other libraries on campus that had E.G. Stillman photograph albums. So this led to a very comprehensive project in which we performed photograph treatments on the albums in the photograph. We worked with the book conservators who provided album treatments. We did rehousing, Robert did cataloging, and then there was digitization. And so we then combined it all into a virtual collection, and we leveraged the research that Robert had done while cataloging and created a very robust website with a lot of information about the photographers and the time period, and it is used extensively by researchers. And then you can see some of those beautiful photographs. And because it's cherry blossom season, there you go. During the survey in 2002, 2003, it became very clear that there were salt prints, very early photographs, spread throughout Harvard. And this gave us the impetus to look at these salt prints a little more closely in a multidisciplinary way. And we identified over 3,000, between 3,000 and 5,000 salt prints at Harvard. So we've started with survey. And the important part about the survey is that we always do pair the curator and the conservator together during the survey process. And so I'm working with Melissa Banta, our curator. And Elena Bulat is in this photograph with Tatiana Cole, who was interning with us at the time. Don't be afraid, I'm not going to talk about this too much. So this was the database that we were using to collect data. And the point that I want to show you is how many fields and how many points of data we were collecting. And I want you to notice the color coding. There's green, blue, yellow, orange. So these refer to different areas of intellectual control that we were talking about. So the green area is the intellectual description of the collection. The blue area is the physical description of those objects. The yellow is the condition, and the orange is action items. So this led us to some analysis, some colorimetry, and now it's an official conservation talk because I have a chart that no one can read. And we performed treatment. And the biggest part of this particular endeavor, which we're still working on, is and has been education and outreach. So we had Mark Osterman come in to give us a hands-on workshop for the preservation team, and then 2 years later, Elena Boulat led a workshop for the rest of the conservation team. We've given multiple presentations to the library community. We have significant information that we're making available on our website, and an exhibition about the salt prints, which we're timing to coincide with the PMG's winter meeting in Cambridge in 2015. So you saw this image at the beginning of my presentation. Early on, Harvard relied on photographs for teaching in the classroom. And here you can see an early 20th century use of photographs in the geology department. And then towards the mid to late 20th century, there was a fallow period where the photographs just were not used in teaching. However, that's coming full circle again. And parts of this collection do still exist, and we've worked with it. It's the Gardner collection documenting New England locations. And so we've treated them, we've rehoused them, we've cataloged them, and we've digitized them. And this has breathed new life into these photographs. These images are not only used to study geologic formations and erosion, but they're used in fields where they had not ever even been envisioned that they would be used, and such as climate change, and the evolution of urban and suburban landscapes. And I really like this pile of rocks, and it's so unappealing because this is the street I live on, and this is what it looks like today, and you would never recognize it. So to wrap up, there were 3 factors that have become heavy sources of influence for the development of our program. The first is the Harvard mandate for teaching with primary source materials. The second is the overall push for making quote-unquote hidden collections available. And I would say the third is an increased and almost voracious appetite for digitization, particularly with online courses. And this is made much easier now than it was 5 years ago, because the Weissman Preservation Center and Imaging Services is now together in preservation under the direction of Franziska Frey. So we've had a multidisciplinary approach that has left us being very flexible to adapt to these changes. And it's been so successful that the preservation department at Harvard is looking at it to adapt it to other formats, particularly audiovisual materials. Now, ours is a young program. We're still learning, we're still growing, and we are happy to be doing so alongside our colleagues at the Hermitage. I'd like to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Paul and Harriet Weissman, and the Harvard Library for their support. My colleagues at Harvard, including Lena Boulat, Melissa Banta, Robert Burton, and Franziska Frey. And my colleagues at the Hermitage Photo Conservation Initiative, especially Paul Messier. Well, that was the voice of God. Especially Paul Messier, through his survey, he helped lay the foundation for our success. Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you, Brenda. That was wonderful. Our 4th speaker today is Andrew Robb. Andrew has been with the Library of Congress since 1996. He is currently the head of Special Format Conservation. I should know, because he's one of my section heads. He also serves as the coordinator of the library's Preservation Emergency Response Team, and that's a big role, and because we do have sometimes an emergency. He has been a conservator and a consultant for institutions both nationally and internationally, including the National Gallery of Art, the Smithsonian Institution, the Getty Conservation Institute, and the National Dai Library in Japan. He received an MS in Art Conservation with a major in Photograph Conservation and a minor in Paper Conservation from the Winterthur University of Delaware program in Art Conservation. Please welcome Andrew.
Thank you, Elmer. So I'm going to talk about photograph preservation at scale, at large-scale collections, and some of the lessons we've learned since I've been here since 1996. And Brenda's done a great job of laying a lot of foundation for my talk. So I could give almost a similar talk, same kinds of projects, same kinds of activities, but I'm going to do this in a slightly higher level of just some more touchstones of lessons of how to deal with large collections, and talk a little bit about what large is and why we have them at the Library of Congress. We are, in our origins, the Library of Congress, and our first library was in the northwest pavilion of the Capitol building, which you see circled here on this slide. We serve and still remain as our primary mission to serve Congress and their needs for information and support. But we also are the National Library of the United States, and we serve the American people in their needs for information. And many of our functions, like the Copyright Office, are core activities that are somewhat library-like. They support the library's activities, but they also support people in other kinds of ways. So why would we have photographs? Initially, the library was quite limited in the sense of it was a legislative library. But that story starts here with the burning of the Capitol during the War of 1812. The library was destroyed, and the decision was made to replace that library with Thomas Jefferson's library, the largest library in North America at the time, and a quite large, expansive universal collection. And that justification to have a library of which Congress could consult on any topic that they needed, which was agreed to, is still our primary mission, to collect and preserve a universal collection of human creativity and knowledge. And we're one of the only libraries in the world that has a mandate to collect in all languages. We don't really have a qualifying statement. We certainly have strengths with American collections, but that is not solely our strength. So that core of what we collect comes from the decision to rebuild the library. The daguerreotype you see in the lower right is the rebuilt Capitol. It's a daguerreotype we hold. It's one of our photographic treasures, and it shows the Capitol at about 1846. The library had since moved at that time to another place, and one of the themes you'll see is that we keep needing more storage. We still need more storage. It's a theme of the library. It's part of our history. We moved throughout the Capitol until about the end of the 19th century, where we finally got our own building, which you see here, the Jefferson Building, which I commend to you. If you're a visitor, you should see it. It's a wonderful building inside. And the Jefferson Library is both on display and housed in the Southwest Pavilion here. And you see the slide here of the Jefferson Library on display. But it's also, that's where if a researcher needs a book, it is pulled from that location. Since the time of the building of the library, we have built two other buildings on Capitol Hill, the Adams Building directly to the east, and the Madison Building, where you are now, directly to the south. We also, since that time, have built the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, about an hour and a half away in Culpeper, Virginia, that houses our very large moving image collections, and we have high-density storage, very similar to our colleagues at Harvard. It's based on their high-density storage. We have a lot of collaborations with them historically. We're very similar in scale. And I'll talk a little bit about storage in a second, but we have very large and expansive collections, of which photographs fit very neatly into that universal collection notion. Photography really is a universal medium. That was the voice of God saying I was right. We have a very expansive photograph collection, and it really is an amazing privilege to be able to work with it and to participate in its care. We have very, very early photographs. This is an iconic image, daguerreotype by Robert Cornelius, probably the first self-portrait made in North America. It's from probably September, early October of 1839, and it's still is amazing that we have such an early example of photography in North America. We have expansive collections related to the 19th century, including a very, very large collection of Matthew Brady images of the Civil War. Technological innovations. We have the Wright Brothers Archive, both the photographs and manuscript materials, and that's another strength of our collections, is that they are not solely photographic. They are broad, they are deep, and you can see images of first flight, but you can also see the notebooks and diaries of the Wright brothers. We have international collections. This is early color photography documenting the Russia of the turn of the century by Prokudin-Gorsky, and technically this is well worth its own presentation. Kind of amazing. You actually do have a color image on the left. But it wasn't until digitization that this became actually truly easily done. But it is an amazing document of Russian life at the turn of the century, and it really does make a difference when you see these things in color as opposed to monochrome. We have a very large art photography collection, particularly a strength in pictorialism. This is an image by Coburn, and that too is an amazing wealth that I'll return to in a moment. We have really important photographs of baseball players with photographs. This is one of my favorites. We document American life in particular, but also life throughout the world. We are a repository of images for use by researchers and how they see fit. We have iconic images and collections like the Farm Security Administration. And one of the things that's also key to this understanding of our collections, and Brenda touched on this a little bit, is that while we do have iconic images, Migrant Mother is typically seen in this image from the retouched negative, but we have all of these supporting images from the Farm Security Administration, particularly the file print, which is different. At some point, this thumb got retouched out, and so the file print that we have here is an antecedent from this negative to when it was retouched. So this is the kind of thing that researchers use all the time. They go through our collections, they see other photographs that Dorothea Lange took at that time. We have other information related to how this image, but not this one, was published throughout its early history at the Farm Security Administration. And we still have these things today. Fortunately, this is no longer in a reference file. As you can see, these are scratches and all sorts of evidence of use. And one of the things we do, as Brenda was describing, is we treat things. So that's always a real pleasure. And get rid of things like those scratches and other kinds of things like that. So treatment is certainly important. And again, I'll come back to that. Documenting American life is, this is a very, very large archive of Charles and Ray Eames, the designers, American designers, and we have just an enormous amount of their drawings, photographs, and it really is a mixed collection of so many different things. And again, as Brenda put so well about a multidisciplinary approach, we very much depend on each other in preserving these items. We have paper conservators, book conservators, all sorts of different kinds of people helping us in collection stabilization, and we really depend on that because, as we'll get to, we have large collections. We continue to collect photography, and the contemporary photography, as you all know, is getting larger in format, and it used to be when I was in school that 11 by 14, 20 by 24 was a somewhat large photograph. This is a photograph by Edward Bertinsky. It used to be considered large. It's approximately, I think, 3 by 4.5 feet, and that's now a normal size photograph, frankly. Contemporary photographs are getting larger and larger, and that goes back to some of the challenges of photography. It is not a static thing. The formats I've shown you are just a small sampling of what we have. The reasons they were taken are extraordinarily varied, and that makes the preservation challenges very hard because it's not a fixed it's a moving target. Photography is ever changing, and the world in which we live now, where digitization is really the paradigm shift, is a reality and a challenge for us. So let's talk a little bit about stewardship. In 2000, we had our 200th anniversary, and people are probably getting tired of me showing this cup because I've showed it almost every talk I do. But it really encompasses what we have. We have an enormous, large, universal collection of books, sound recordings, moving images, photographs, maps, manuscripts in one institution. And stewardship is a term that we try to use to describe how all of us here, close to 4,000 people working on different kinds of aspects of our collection, all in some way are part of this stewardship. And while preservation is very important, we are not the only part of this, and we depend on each other to care and use and sustain these items. At the same time, when you're newly hired and you're the first photograph conservator in many years, Sarah Wagner laid the groundwork for me. There's a bit of a gap, and there's some contractors and different kinds of people. But when I was hired, I was the first photograph conservator in many years, and you get this cup. It's 12 million photographs, and wow, that's a lot of photographs. I'm one person. What do I do? And this is where the Mellon survey, the Harvard survey, was very helpful. I knew about this from a talk that Paul gave in 2003. I really wanted to do it. I was fortunate to be asked to consult on the development of the Harvard Preservation Initiative with photographs. Kept talking about how much I liked the survey and I wanted to do it. And then Paul and I were just happening to walk through the hotel at Harvard as he's taking me back to the airport, and we run into Angelica Rudenstein, and she sits me down and tells me that I'm going to do the survey here, which I was very grateful to do, but I remember still vividly, Paul and I are leaving. He's like, you know that what just happened there, don't you? I said, oh, yes, I know, I'm ready. So, but it is an example where we have enormous needs here. We have very adequate and at times exemplary resources, but at the same time, it's very helpful to have external help. And in this case, the survey was really, really helpful for me to grapple with, well, where are those 12 million photographs? What do they need? And our situation was very similar to Harvard's. And I think one of the more critical things initially about our doing this successfully, although it had its challenges, and Ashley and Allison and Angela know them all too well, we did get it done, and it really has served, as you'll see, as an example of things that we have since done. But more critically, it helped me understand that, in fact, we have probably about 17 million photographs, and now Princeton Photographs, that number of 12 million probably came from Princeton Photographs alone. Princeton Photographs now says they have about 13.7 million photographs, but by my survey, I find that there's at least 3 million photographs in 10 other parts of the library. And that's probably a conservative number. I was just speaking to one of my colleagues in the manuscripts division, and he feels that my estimate for manuscripts is off by at least an order of magnitude. So we have a lot of photographs. And this is where the Hermitage project comes in. You know, we had done the survey, it worked, it was very helpful for me internally. It justified a lot of things, as I'll get into. But one of the things I think that is really important for both people to understand its scale, and for those of you that are in the Hermitage project, is that outreach is an incredibly important part of an outcome of projects. And Harvard was very helpful in talking to me about their experiences with the survey. And Paul asked Melissa and I to go to St. Petersburg in 2007 to speak about our experience and to really try to convince people that doing the survey at the Hermitage was going to work. And in fact, it's really startling to be here seeing the success of the training program, to realize at the time it was not completely clear how the survey would be viewed or received. And while there was a lot of support for it, the survey brings up a lot of questions that you have to grapple with as an institution, and I think it's to the Hermitage's credit that they decided to do it. But it is a big initiative, but outreach is something that I think both informs you as a person doing it. It's a way to pass on what you've learned and how people have helped you, but it benefits you directly as well. It helps you really understand the challenges that you have and to see other perspectives on it. And it is always helpful to talk to Brenda about the challenges at Harvard, because it makes you feel less isolated and feeling like that people can do interesting things. So I commend you to do that. One of the ways you deal with scale is to talk with your peers and to help them. One of the things that the Harvard survey really helped us with is to see that in those 10 divisions, or what we call divisions or departments, they don't have photo specialists, and they need advocates. Those collections are somewhat hidden. That was a term that Brenda used, and it's not that they're lost or they're not cataloged, but if you go to those divisions, this is a good example of geography and map, where when I first got here, I would sort of ask, well, do you have any photographs? And I would get politely told no. And I would be skeptical, but I was only one person, and I said, well, okay, I don't completely know where to go with this, but I think that there are photographs there. These are examples of salted paper maps. They are actual photographs. They were taken by a camera like this. And Adrienne Lundgren, when she got here, one of our photograph conservators, just happened to sort of, through conversations and a little bit of interest, discover that we have many hundreds of these salted paper maps. These are evidentially very important, and people in geography and map knew that. These were often carried by generals. This is on the Confederate side. It was carried by Robert E. Lee, but they are salted paper maps. And what Adrienne has been able to do is really describe why these are important and add a whole expanse to the fact that these really are photographic materials as well as maps. So advocacy for photographs is important because there are many places where people really use them and they value them, but they don't understand them as materials, and that makes it harder to care for them. They will receive better care if they have advocates. Storage. I touched on this. One of the things that we've done is enormously expanded our storage since my time here. And we've been very fortunate that as we've been able to build high-density storage, we've been able to include cold storage into that, both for our book collections, but also even colder conditions for our photograph collections. And we have essentially rehoused in storage all of our transparency and negative collections that require that kind of cold storage, which is quite an accomplishment over this time. It's a credit to the library for recognizing this need. And it's also a point of if you have at scale, sometimes you have to wait until you build buildings or do other things to take advantage of the cold and cool environments, building those things that you need. This is an example of our repository at Fort Meade, Maryland. As you can see, this one is for our books. It's very large. Our Harvard colleagues will see that it's actually quite similar. And it's very effective, and it's really, I think, the future for large-scale collection storage. On a level down, storage furniture. I was too embarrassed to show our pictures of file cabinets after file cabinets after file cabinets. So those pictures of Brenda's file cabinets are just what we have too for a lot of our collections, and we really would like to upgrade them into gasketed cabinets like this, which we're doing. That was one of the findings of the survey. And what I would say on that level is you need to measure twice at least, and you need to have someone helping you so they measure twice too, so you have lots of people measuring, because particularly if you have a 19th century building, of which a lot of the Hermitage ones are, you have lots of places where your crate will not get to the destination if you don't measure correctly. So you have to talk with vendors about when you make the crate, it has to be this tall, and what size pallet are you going to put it on? And you have to measure all of the things. So measure lots of times. You can see here that this was the most harrowing one, where it's like a half inch getting into this one elevator. If we can't get into this elevator, we are stuck. Then we had to take it out of the crate and then just barely fit it into the space where the gasketed cabinet lay. And they got here. Success. So you don't learn this in school. This is a vocational training. You just, but otherwise you can't get your materials in these cabinets. Research. We know so little about the photographs in our holdings. Why do these two photographs? These are by Eva Watson-Schutze. They're pictorialist photographs. One on the left is in excellent condition. The one on the right is not in excellent condition. I know that because this is all retouching right here. So it wasn't originally like this. It's faded. Why? I can't tell you. I have theories about why, but we know little in some cases about why things are behaving the way they are, if they're going to get worse. And it's something that we have to spend time on too. And this is a huge task. But one of the things that's really helpful about being in a library is we have amazing primary resources about how these things are made. So it's a real joy here to both have the photographs, but then have the items and descriptions of how those things are made. And they've often come to us by copyright deposit. So this is the camera notes about glycerin developing platinum prints that was published by Stieglitz and Kiley. This is the copyright note in their publication, and this is the stamp from that Register of Copyrights that we've received it. And it's very blurry, but you can see here that that's the arc of it. So this is the copy that either Kiley or Stieglitz or one of their assistants sent to us, and now we can use it to help preserve their things. It's an amazing experience, and it's something to keep in mind with research, that holding primary literature is very important and very useful. And for photography, we have an ample amount of it, and we're just beginning to mine it, which leads me to this. Eric stole my thunder slightly, but I'll make another plug for it. The Platinum and Palladium Photograph Symposium coming this fall is one of those examples where there's absolutely no way, even with the resources we have, we can do this work alone. And collaboration is very important for us in the photographic field. We have a very small number of people, probably internationally 200 people at most. So we need to do this together, and we're very good at this because we're such a small community. We know we have to work together because we'll accomplish much more if we do it that way. conservation is the last thing I'm talking about. And it is sort of ironic because when you're in school, when you're learning how to do things, this is what you learn how to do. And all of the other things are kind of off to the side or secondary. And that's right from a pedagogical point of view. You have to be able to understand how to treat things at an individual level. But you have all these other challenges at scale. But conservation is still a core activity for us, and it's really, really important. It is, however, very time intensive. It's very labor intensive. It requires a very skilled set of staff, and I'm very lucky to have such a skilled staff. This is an example of Dana Hemingway, one of our conservators, who's working on preparing these Lillenquist materials for exhibit. It's a very challenging exhibit. You can see a picture of the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Billington. The donor had a real vision for how this was going to go, and it was actually breathtaking. But from a preparation point of view, very, very challenging, literally hundreds and hundreds of objects. And it's a kind of example of something that we do well under time pressures, lots of demands. It's what photograph conservators do. We're very practical. We solve things. And that goes back to the stewardship issue. We have collections of so many different intentions, so many different formats that stewardship comes back to. We have roles, we have to work with other people, and part of that is training. This is a picture of Dana and Alicia. Dana is our coordinator for our fellowships, and Alicia is one of our graduates of our internships. It's nice to have her here in the audience. She's at the National Gallery. There's a lot of cross-fertilization. We're a small field. But stewardship is part of taking care of things. We collaborate not only with our peers across our institutions, in our institution, but we're collaborating with our peers across time. The way you make things last for centuries of time is you have to hand things off to other people, and you have to hand it off to them in a way that they can care for it. And that's where training is so critical, because you have to have people trained to do it. So collaboration. Do it with a dose of humor. Some of these challenges are daunting, but it's important to do it in a way that is optimistic, and I think we do that too. This isn't just an American trait, it's a Russian one. This is from our trip in St. Petersburg, and I was trying to review this with people. I don't completely understand the circumstance of this, but this is a very large glass plate negative, and they were very comfortable just picking it up and showing it us. This is really large. I think Paul and I were ready to fall over. Our translator, she got the gist of this. This is very amusing, but it was not harmed. No photograph was harmed in this. And I think it shows you that a dose of humor is important, and that working with people can be difficult, but in the end, it's well worth it, and humor helps. A little dose of humor goes a long way, and it's well worth your time. And I leave this as a Russian photograph to our next speaker to go into more depth. So Tanya is our next speaker, and Elmer will introduce her. Thank you very much. I'll do it. Elmer's my boss, so I have to do it.
In the meantime, I'll just, that's great. Thank you, Andrew. That was wonderful. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our international colleague, Tatiana Sayatina, and I hope I didn't butcher that too much. Tatiana is the head of the Laboratory of Scientific Conservation of Photographic Materials at the State Hermitage Museum in Russia, and participated in a Mellon-funded survey of the Hermitage photographic collections in 2008 and 2010. Prior to this, she worked as a conservator in the Laboratory for Scientific Restoration of Works of Applied Art made of organic materials. She graduated from the St. Petersburg State University with a diploma in archaeology and has treatment experience in conservation of archaeological wood and of applied arts with a special interest in Japanese lacquer and ivory objects. So some of us, our Russian is probably a little rusty. So Tatiana's lecture will be translated by Alexandra Davidova. She's an interpreter of the Hermitage Friends organization. Please help me welcome Tatiana and Alexandra.
Which microphone should we use? All three of them. Huh? All of them.
Okay.
What's important that you're in here, though? Okay.
Окей. Добрый день всем. Тема моего выступления – это обзор обучающих семинаров, организованных в рамках совместной программы Государства Эрмитажа и фонда Эндрю Меллона.
I'm very glad to welcome you here. I will talk today about the seminars that were organized as part of the initiative of the State Hermitage Museum and the Andrew Mellon Foundation.
Во время подготовки к этому выступлению я постаралась объединить семинары в определенные группы. У меня их получилось 4.
When thinking of how to present to you the results of this training program, I decided that I should combine the seminars into 4 groups. And here are the groups.
По этой схеме я постараюсь представить все направления обучающей программы нашего проекта.
So I'm going to cover all the aspects of the training program of this project.
В Государственном Эрмитаже было организовано, проведено 9 семинаров, темы которых вы можете видеть на экране.
First, there were seminars organized in the State Hermitage Museum, and you can see all 9 of them on the screen.
В мае 2010 года состоялся первый семинар в рамках нашего проекта «Монтирование, оформление, превентивной консервации и хранение фотографических материалов» под руководством Хью Фипса.
The first workshop was organized in May 2010. It was entitled Matting, Framing, Preventive Conservation, Handling and Storage Materials, and it was conducted by Hugh Phibbs.
За время семинара с Хью Фипсом мы поработали в хранении фотографий отдела истории русской культуры, были получены рекомендации по хранению, а также по правильному обращению с фотографическими материалами.
During this workshop, we had an opportunity to go into the storage of the Russian department of the State Hermitage Museum, and he also gave us recommendations on how to transfer our collections from the old building into the new open storage facility, and how better preserve and mount them and frame them.
Мы узнали способы монтировок фотографий на плотных паспорту, варианты монтировок на лапках и без них, как хранить разноформатные фотографии одной коллекции.
We have also learned different methods of mounting, including hinging or without hinges, and how to store materials of different formats.
Ну и также смогли попрактиковаться сами в изготовлении монтировок.
And we also had time to practice it ourselves.
С 7 декабря 2011 года по 5 февраля 2012 года в нашем музее проходила выставка «Эпоха дагеротипов. Ранняя фотография в России».
In December 2011, February 2012, an exhibition of daguerreotypes was held in the State Hermitage Museum.
На выставке были представлены экспонаты из научной библиотеки Академии художеств, из литературного музея Института русской литературы Российской академии наук, а также 32 дагеротипа собрания нашего музея.
This exhibition featured objects from the Academy of Fine Arts of St. Petersburg, from the Literature Museum of the Institute of Russian Literature, and also 32 daguerreotypes from the collection of the Hermitage.
Нашей главной задачей стало обеспечение мониторингом состояния сохранности дагеротипов на выставке.
And our main objective was to monitor the condition of the daguerreotypes during the exhibition.
В рамках наших задач прошел семинар по фотодокументированию дагеротипов под руководством Жуан Чен.
And we were very lucky to have a workshop on the documentation and photo documentation of the daguerreotypes before, during and after exhibition, which was done by J.J. Chen.
Была произведена подробная фотофиксация экспонатов и составлено описание сохранности, и обсуждались вопросы наблюдения за экспонатами во время выставки.
We did very precise and detailed photo documentation of the daguerreotypes at the exhibition, and we had to compile the condition reports for all the objects, and we discussed how to better monitor the conditions at the exhibition.
Сначала 32 дагеротипа были визуально осмотрены, объединены в группы по размеру, чтобы рационально распределить время съемки. Оборудование было откалибровано, установлено, был выставлен свет, и камера была подключена к компьютерам.
So first we had to visually evaluate the condition of the daguerreotypes. We had to group them according to their size to organize the workflow. Then we had to organize the working space and to put all the equipment in place.
Все условия съемки фиксировались в компьютере и базе данных, чтобы повторно воспроизвести все условия для съемки дагерротипов после выставки.
We carefully documented the conditions of photographing the daguerreotypes so that they could be repeated when we do the same after the exhibition.
Было сделано 5 видов съемки для каждого дагерротипа,
For each daguerreotype, we took 5 photographs,
которые вы можете видеть на экране.
which you can see here.
Специально для этой выставки была разработана двуязычная база данных Полом Месьером, куда заносились сохранность экспонатов, где можно было посмотреть, если это необходимо, все фотографии, которые были сделаны до и после съемки.
Especially for this exhibition, Paul has developed a database in 2 languages where we could document the conditions of photography and the condition of the daguerreotypes.
Описание сохранности и фотографии пластины дагерротипа были распечатаны, и также часть фотографий была перенесена на iPad для мониторинга выставки.
So we had all the examination reports printed out and also had that on the iPad so that we could go into the exhibition space and do the monitoring inside.
Во время монтирования выставки совместно с лабораторией климатического контроля нашего музея в витрины были установлены дата-логгеры, которые фиксировали уровень освещенности, температуру и относительную влажность в витринах.
At the stage of preparing the exhibition, we have installed data loggers into the showcases that would monitor the climate conditions inside the showcases.
Во время выставки также фиксировались показания и осматривались экспонаты. Обычно мониторинг проводился 2 реставраторами.
And in the course of exhibition, 2 conservators regularly documented the data from the loggers.
После закрытия выставки съемка дагерротипов повторилась с соблюдением всех условий и параметров, которые были во время их съемки перед выставкой.
After the exhibition was over, we have repeated the same process and we repeated the same conditions when the same as during the photo documentation before the exhibition.
На этом этапе пластина каждого дагерротипа фиксировалась в прямом и боковом положении при нормальном освещении и в прямом положении в отраженном свете.
So for these purposes, we took several photos of each plate in normal and specular light, in direct and inside views.
Исходя из наших наблюдений во время выставки, экспонаты вели себя стабильно, видимых изменений не зафиксировано.
Analysis showed that no visible and no factual differences in the condition of the daguerreotypes occurred during the exhibition.
И хочется отметить, что благодаря семинару с JJ выставка была обеспечена полным комплектом документации, состояния сохранности дагерротипов и мониторингом.
And thanks to the workshop, which was done by J.J. Chen, the exhibition had excellent documentation for the condition and for everything that was during the exhibition had excellent documentation.
Семинар также заложил основы для разработки процесса фотодокументирования экспонатов, поступающих в лабораторию реставрации фотоматериалов.
This seminar also set example and a pattern to follow during the exhibitions that might follow, and it helped us to establish the workflow for the Laboratory of Conservation of Photographic Materials.
На следующем слайде вы видите темы семинаров, которые были организованы для сотрудников Hermitage в мировых центрах по изучению фотографии.
The following workshops were organized for the members of the Hermitage staff in different countries of the world.
В июле 2010 года на базе университета Делавера, реставрационного центра Филадельфии и музея Метрополитена состоялся семинар, посвященный фотографическим процессам XIX века. Цели семинара вы видите на экране.
In July 2010, the workshop, which was entitled 19th Century Photographic Processes, was organized at the Winterthur Museum and Gardens and in Philadelphia and in Metropolitan Museum.
Много времени уделялось практике, определению видов фотографий, состояния сохранности, программы реставрационных мероприятий.
We had an opportunity to spend enough time on determining different kinds of photographs and photo processes, their condition, and we could also develop programs and conservation proposals for them.
Мы познакомились с сухим и влажным способом удаления поверхностных загрязнений с фотографий, факторами, которые определяют выбор методики, а также с материалами и инструментами, используемыми при реставрации фотографий.
We have been introduced to different ways of surface cleaning, to different factors that determine the choice of conservation strategies, as well as materials and equipment necessary for the conservation of photographs.
Каждый год для научного сотрудника нашей лаборатории и реставраторов также организовывались семинары в научно-исследовательском центре реставрации в городе Париже.
For individual members of this project, several workshops were organized in Paris, in the research center.
Темы, которые мы затрагивали на этих семинарах, вы можете также увидеть на экране.
And you have seen what kind of workshops were organized for individual conservators and curators.
Так, например, для проведения теста на фотоактивность мы отбирали образцы тестируемых материалов.
For example, we could do the PAT test on different kinds of materials.
Подготавливали их, делали измерения после инкубационного периода.
We worked on these materials and we measured them after the period of incubation.
Мы также познакомились с простыми тестами на определение содержания в материалах серы и хлора, а также на идентификацию пленок из поливинилхлорида, полиэтилена, нитроцеллюлозы и ацетатцеллюлозы.
We were also introduced to different kinds of different ways of testing for PVC, PET, and for determining the amount of sulfur and chlorine, and determining different kinds of cellulose.
Также было проведено тестирование на кислотность различных типов бумаги, применяемых в реставрации нашего музея.
We have also performed several acidity tests for the types of paper that are used in conservation in the Hermitage.
Мы освоили методику материала и оборудования, применяемые при идентификации волокон бумаги.
We were introduced to the materials and the equipment necessary to do the tests of the paper fibers.
Эти стажировки также были важны для определения приоритетов в закупке научно-исследовательского оборудования для лаборатории научной реставрации фотоматериалов.
All these workshops allowed us to determine which equipment should be bought first for the new laboratory of conservation of photographic materials.
Для нас очень важно иметь хорошую исследовательскую базу в лаборатории для проведения тестирования реставрационных материалов, идентификации фотографических техник, покрытия клеев, красителей, пигментов, проведения pH-анализа.
For the Hermitage, it is very important to have the laboratory which would be equipped with the best possible materials and equipment to perform tests of various conservation materials, to identify photographic processes, and to determine the materials that are used in production of photographs.
В июне 2013 года нам представилась уникальная возможность пройти стажировку в одном из основных центров Америки по подготовке реставраторов фотографий, колледже Баффало по теме углубленное техническое изучение фотографических материалов.
In June 2013, we had a chance to visit the workshop in the Buffalo State College, the workshop which was on advanced techniques for the identification of photographic processes.
Вся наша работа была построена по схеме, которая представлена на слайде, является универсальной. Этот семинар можно разделить на два этапа.
So this is how our work was organized. This is a universal scheme. The workshop can be actually described as in two stages.
Это visuальное исследование под микроскопом и в ультрафиолете.
So first we focused on the visual assessment. There was microscopic tests and tests in ultraviolet.
И физико-химические исследования, такие как микрохимические анализы, инфракрасная спектроскопия и рентгенфлуоресцентные исследования.
And analytical research, chemical analysis, infrared spectroscopy and X-ray fluorescent analysis.
К семинару JJ подготовила учебную коллекцию фотоматериалов, и наша главная задача стала их идентификация.
JJ has assembled a whole collection of education materials for us, and we could test all of them.
Мы действовали по той схеме, которую вы видели на предыдущем слайде.
So we used this scheme that was introduced to the previous slide.
Мы отобрали также отпечатки, которые вызывали у нас сомнения для дальнейшей идентификации другими методами.
From this large collection, we have selected several photos that we were not sure about to perform following tests.
И нужно отметить, что прошедшие стажировки в Париже и семинары по идентификации помогли нам на этом этапе работы.
And at this stage, the seminars that were done in Paris on identification of photographic techniques and materials were very useful.
Под руководством доктора Кори Роги мы проводили микрохимические анализы, тесты на определение нитроцеллюлозы, используя дифениламин, знакомый нам по стажировке во Франции, протеинов, используя сульфат меди или концентрированную азотную кислоту.
Dr. Roge helped us to perform microchemical analysis tests to identify nitrocellulose, which we have already done in France, and to test the proteins, the albumin and gelatin, which was also very useful and interesting.
Под ее же руководством мы работали с инфракрасным спектрометром.
We have also had an opportunity to work with infrared spectroscopic equipment.
В своих исследованиях мы опирались на схемы, представленные в книге «Инфракрасная спектроскопия в реставрации», опубликованной Институтом Гетти.
We have used the publication of the Institute of Getty to do this kind of analysis.
На следующих слайдах вы увидите схемы из этой книги и спектры, полученные с поверхностно-слоевой фотографии, как результат наших исследований.
So you will see schemes from this book and our own results from the tests.
Часть фотографий была отобрана для рентгенфлуоресцентного исследования с целью установить наличие тонирования и чем тонировались фотографии.
We have also selected several photos to do the X-ray fluorescent tests to identify the coating, the retouchings, and the materials of the retouchings.
В основном мы проводили исследования, используя ручной портативный рентгенфлуоресцентный спектрометр фирмы Bruker.
This is the equipment that we have used during these tests, handheld Bruker spectrometer.
И на следующих слайдах вы увидите результаты нашей работы.
And here are the results of this work.
За время проекта также были организованы 6 стажировок по реставрации фотографии с целью отработки методик реставрации фотографии на практике. Из них 4 индивидуальные стажировки в студии Пола Месье.
Several trainings were also organized for the conservators that take part in this project. 4 of them were individual trainings in the atelier in the studio of Paul Messier.
В июне 2011 года в реставрационном центре Филадельфии под руководством Барбары Лемон состоялся первый практический семинар, где реставраторы познакомились на практике с основными методами удаления поверхностных загрязнений, подклейки разрывов, исполнения утрат и тонировок.
In June 2011, we had a workshop in the Conservation Center for Historic Artifacts done by Barbara Lemon.
И следующие слайды — это наши результаты.
And here are the results of this workshop.
В 2012-2013 годах реставраторы нашей лаборатории проходили стажировку в реставрационной студии Пола Месье под руководством Джей Чен, Дайен Тафиловский и Дженнифер Секстон.
There were also workshops organized in 2012-2013 for specialists from our laboratory. They were done by J.J. Chen, Diane Tafilovsky, and Jennifer McGlinchey.
Главный упор был сделан не на проведение полной комплексной реставрации и консервации отдельного объекта, а на освоение различных реставрационных процессов на различных видах фотографических материалов.
And the main objective was not to perform the whole range of conservation treatment on individual daguerreotypes or objects, but to study specific techniques on specific materials.
Были выбраны для практических мероприятий альбуминовые, желатиновые, платиновые отпечатка разной степени сохранности с разными видами повреждений, а также 2 дагерротипа.
So we were able to treat different albumin, gelatin, and platinum prints in different condition. And with different kinds of losses, and we were also able to treat 2 daguerreotypes.
Были освоены такие реставрационные процессы, как удаление поверхностных загрязнений, световая и химическая отбелка, подклейка разрывов, тонировки, дублировка, увлажнение прессования, укрепление заломов и изломов, удаление наклеек и восполнение утрат.
And we have studied such kinds of conservation treatment as surface cleaning, light and chemical bleaching, mending the tears, relining, retouchings, wetting, flattening, and all kinds of other conservation techniques.
При выборе того или иного метода реставрации обсуждали состояние сохранности, проблемы, с которыми можно столкнуться во время работы, плюсы и минусы выбранного метода и предполагаемый результат.
And each time we had to select the proper conservation strategy, we discussed the results that we wanted to achieve, problems that we might face during conservation, and tried to select the best possible strategy.
И, наконец, последняя составляющая обучающей нашей программы – это участие в семинарах, организованных Американским институтом реставрации.
And the last component of our training program was participation in the workshops organized by the American Institute of Conservation.
В июне 2011 года мы участвовали в семинаре «Фотографические негативы XIX века» в Международном музее фотографии и кино George Eastman House.
Such a seminar held in 2011 in George Eastman House.
В собрании нашего музея хранится огромное количество фотографий на стекле, стеклянных негативов, амбротипов, автохромов, а также дагеротипов.
The State Hermitage Museum has a very extensive collection of glass plate negatives, ambrotypes, autochromes, daguerreotypes, and other kinds of photos.
Поэтому участие в семинаре по реставрации стекла фотографии в музее Гетти в октябре 2013 года было очень важным.
That is why it was very important that we were given a chance to participate in the workshop that was organized by Getty Museum on the conservation of glass.
За неделю семинара нам не только показали на примере горизонтальной и вертикальной способы склейки разбитого стекла, воссоздании декоративного раскрашенного стекла, но и мы сами участвовали, освоили эти методы.
So first we were introduced to various methods of assembling and repair of glass, and then we were given a chance to do this ourselves.
И, наконец, в конце моего выступления хочу немного рассказать про работу нашей лаборатории.
And at last, a few words about the laboratory for scientific conservation of photographic materials in the State Hermitage Museum.
Сейчас наша лаборатория располагается в новых помещениях в реставрационно-хранительском центре «Старая деревня».
It is housed in the new premises inside St. Petersburg, but not in the main building. The place is called Open Storage Facility «Старая деревня».
Официально лаборатория была основана 1 сентября 2011 года.
The laboratory was officially established on the 1st of September 2011.
И штат лаборатории состоял из 3 сотрудников.
And at that moment there were 3 members of staff.
Заведующий лабораторией, художника-реставратора и научного сотрудника.
Head of laboratory, conservator and scientist.
За это время наши сотрудники подготовили выставки, такие как «Эпоха дагеротипа. Ранняя фотография в России», посвященная творчеству Вильяма Карика, Николая II и его семье.
Our specialists worked on preparation of such temporary exhibitions as, for example, The Age of Daguerreotype, and exhibition on the works of William Carrick, dedicated to Nicholas II and the family of Nicholas II.
После того, как отдел истории русской культуры получил в свое хранение еще одну коллекцию фотографий, наша приоритетная задача стала подготовка фонда к перемещению в новое хранение.
Quite recently, the Department of History of Russian Culture has been given a very extensive collection of photographic materials from the Western European Paintings Department. And the first goal of our laboratory was to prepare this collection for the move into the new premises.
И в этом направлении мы работаем в тесном сотрудничестве с хранителем данной коллекции Ириной Терентьевой.
And at the moment we are working in very close cooperation with the curator of this collection, Irina Terentьева.
13 марта 2013 года лаборатория окончательно переехала в новое помещение, и в середине июля штат нашей лаборатории расширился.
On 13th of March in 2013, we have finally moved into the new premises, and we have acquired 2 more people on the staff of the laboratory.
В данный момент работа над хранением Ирины Терентьевой продолжается, и мы работаем в тесном сотрудничестве с нашими биологами на предмет выявления зараженных экспонатов.
At the moment, we are working actually on this newly acquired collection acquired from one department to another department, and we are cooperating with our specialists from Biological Control Laboratory to identify the contaminated objects.
И за этот период наши реставраторы проделали титанический труд. Мы смогли подготовить к переезду в новое хранение, к перемещению около 7 тысяч экспонатов.
Over this period, we have managed to do huge amount of work. We have prepared 7,000 objects for transfer into the new storage.
Также, помимо этого, у нас в лаборатории проходят экспонаты и плановую реставрацию.
So apart from this huge amount of work, we also do some routine treatment.
И на этом слайде Наталья Лайтар, наш реставратор, работает над фотографией с отдела Меньшиковский дворец.
And on this photo, you can see how our specialist Natalia Laitar, the conservator, is treating a photo that was stored in the Menshikov Palace.
У нас проходит обучение новых сотрудников.
We also train new members of staff.
Реставраторы также регулярно обследуют хранение фотографий.
We also do examination of photographic storages.
Знакомятся с коллекциями фотографий нашего музея.
And do a survey of various photographic collections of the museum.
И последний слайд – это вид нашего хранения, нового хранения.
And this is how the open storage facility looks at the moment. This is where the new laboratory is housed.
Спасибо.
Thank you for your attention.
So we have come to the end or conclusion of our program. I do want to give the opportunity for one or two questions for those of, especially for those who are joining us online. For those of us who are actually here physically present, I would say tap the speaker. Do you have anything, Mary, that's coming in online? Okay. Well, then I want to thank all the speakers. It was a wonderful program, and join me in one round of applause. And thank you very much for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.